In this tutorial session, we will cover what is property data binding and how we can use ngStyle and ngClass data binding in AngularJS application. If you would like to know about what is data binding in Angular, then please watch our previous video. You can also get the link in description.
Hello friends, welcome to our channel WaveTutorials, and you are watching AngularJS full tutorial session. And also I request you to, if you have still not subscribed to our channel, then please subscribe to it and don't forget to click on that notification bell icon so that you will get the notification whenever we upload a new video on this channel. Also, if you found the content of our video is valuable, then please like the video, and in case of any query you can write a comment in comment box. So let's start with today's session.
Property data binding allows us to bind the view of template expression. Property binding in simple terms is defined as updating the value of certain variable in component and displaying it in view. For example, within the square brackets, using the property inner HTML, we are passing this HTML to a HTML tag. So property binding is also a one-way data binding like interpolation, which allow to change the value whenever we require, only at component level. So the same way property binding and interpolation sending their data from component to HTML. So let's open Visual Studio Code and see some practical examples. So in Visual Studio Code, I already set up our environment using inline template with this component. So let's make some changes to see the examples of property binding. So first of all, let's create an image tag where we have to use the property binding. So img src, which should be in square bracket so that we can test the property binding. Also let's create a variable like image URL and pass the URL of image. So let's copy the URL of this image and pass it here, save it. So you can see that the image displaying on browser using property binding. So we can also do the same thing with interpolation. So let me show you. First of all, we have to write the curly braces here, and we need to remove the property binding syntax, and let's save it. And you can see that we achieved the same result using interpolation. So here the question is, what is the difference between property binding and interpolation, whereas we can achieve the same result? Actually, interpolation is a convenient alternate to property binding with a special syntax that Angular convert into a property binding. So let's create another example where it's must have to use interpolation. So for this, let's say we have a dynamic value of this image name which will come from database, and rest of the URL is a static or constant value. So for this, let's use this domain name as a constant value and append it with this source attribute, and rest of the URL will come from database. So let's save it, and you can see the same result. So in this case, we have to use interpolation only. So let's create another example where we have to use only property binding. So let's create an example for this. So first of all, let me create it here. Create a button. And set its property as disabled. And set its value with let's create its variable is disabled of boolean type and set its value to true. Let's save it. And you can see that right now the button is disabled. Now let's change its value to false so that we can click on this button. Now you can see that right now the button is not disabled and we can also click on it. So now let's change it to interpolation. Let's save it. And you can see that button is still disabled whereas it should be enabled. And why so? Because non-string data values will work with property binding only and not with interpolation. So let's create another example of property binding, and let me add in an HTML to a div element. So for this, let's create a div element and set its inner HTML and pass a variable like page data, and let me enclose this in scale back so that it will work as a property binding. And let's declare a variable here and let's save it. So you can see here that we have set in an HTML to a div element. So actually I would like to show you another way of property binding. So here we can also use the bind keyword with this, and this will work same as a property binding. So if you ever see this syntax bind hyphen and rest of the attribute, then don't be confused with that. This is same as of property binding. So this is known as canonical form variation. So you can also use this or a square bracket instead. Now let's see as a security point of view how property binding and interpolation binding process our malicious scripts on the view. So for this, let's add few malicious scripts here like script and set an alert in between. So you can see that there is nothing we have shown in the page. So let's see also it with by removing this canonical variation. You can see we cannot see anything because as a security point of view, interpolation and property binding both remove any of malicious script on the view. So let me check this with interpolation as well. Now let me add pre and post text here. Let me also make it a word wrap. Okay, here. Now let's add and let's save it. So I added a simple text, pre-text and post-text with this script. So you can see that only pre-text and post-text is shown here using interpolation and property binding. So here property binding or interpolation will help us to remove any malicious content or script on the page. The same way, using property binding, we can also apply class binding and style binding on our HTML element. So first of all, let's create an example with class data binding. So before this, let me adjust this little bit and also adjust the width of this image to 150px to save some space. So first of all, let's create a button. and set a default class to it as button btn. I already prepared few classes like btn, btn bold, btn italic, btn red and btn blue. So I applied a class here as a default class btn. So now let's use property binding here and bind a class with property binding and set its property as class applied, and let's create a variable with same name and pass a class to it like btn bold, or also apply one more class btn red. Let's save it. So you can see that we can apply a class using property binding to a button. Now let's get another example of property binding. Let's make a copy of this button and set its property as apply italic class and set an italic class with this like btn italic. Now create a variable with this name as of boolean type and set its value to true. You can see that the italic class is now applied with this button. If I make it false, then italic class will remove from here. Now let's see an example how we can use multiple classes with property binding. So for this, let's create a copy of this button. Let's change its text to multiple classes, and here we need to use ngClass instead of a class keyword, and we need to call a method from where we can add multiple classes. So now let's create a method here like with the same name, add classes, and return an object of classes. Like we have a classes btn bold and set it to true. Let's create it a string btn italic true, and last one is btn blue, also set it to true. Let's save it. There is some error here. Okay, I added another curly bracket here, so let's save it again. And you can see here that we have added a multiple classes here, and you can also control it. Now I don't want to make it italic, so you can change it to false, and you can see here that italic is now removed. Now you can also remove the color as blue, and we can apply another color like button red and set it to true. Now button will be red and blue color is now removed from this button. So using this we can call a method from where we can pass multiple classes using ngClass attribute with this property binding. Now let's see an example of style and ngStyle binding. So first of all, let's get some more space here and create a BR tag here to get a break, a line break, and create a button here. And let's apply a style here, like color red. Let's save it. And now use a style as a property binding, or you can say style binding. We have to create a pair of square bracket and type style dot font hyphen size dot px, and you can pass the size in numeric value, like let's say 30. Let's save it. And using this we can use style binding. We can also apply more than one style using a method like we did here with ngClass. So let's see an example with this. So for this, let's create a button and apply ngStyle and call a method. Now let's create a method with the same name and apply classes here. Return an object we can also specify its color, like color blue. Let's save it. And you can see that here, let me change this name as ngStyle binding. And you can see here that using ngStyle we can pass a multiple styles to a single button element. So here we can see that we have applied color blue with italic font size and text size to 25. So in this session we have covered property data binding. Also we have covered ngStyle and ngClass data binding. So if you still have any query, please write a comment in comment box, or you can also write to me at wavetutorials@outlook.com. I also request you to, if you have still not subscribed to our channel, then please subscribe to it, and if you like the video, then please give a like to this video. My name is Naveen, and thank you for watching this tutorial.